So if everybody's sheep is grazing in one field, then eventually the field runs out of grass and you could no longer use it. So that's the tragedy. And such a game is characterized by a continuum of actions. What is the continuum of actions? How many sheep are you going to graze on the land? You could graze any number of sheep. You could graze 5 sheep. You could graze 20 sheep. You could graze 100 sheep. But before we proceed, tell me, if I graze more, ideally, should I be grazing more sheep or should I be grazing less sheep? If I want to avoid the tragedy, should I be grazing more sheep or should I be grazing less sheep?
Less, sir.
Less, right? So grazing less sheep is probably better, right? That's probably better than grazing more sheep. So the more sheep that I graze, the more quickly the resource is going to be depleted. Okay. So the 2 herders, they decide how many sheep to graze on the village commons, which is small and can be overgrazed, right? So QI, I is equal to 1, 2, is the number of sheep each herder I grazes on the common. So the number of sheep grazed by herder 1 is Q1. So herder 1 কয়টা sheep graze করতেছে Q1. Herder 2 কয়টা sheep graze করতেছে Q2. So Q1 and Q2 represent the number of sheep each herder grazes on the commons. If I'm herder 2, the number of sheep which I'm grazing on the commons is Q2. If I am herder 1, then the number of sheep I graze on the commons is Q1. Now the per sheep value of grazing on the commons. So if you have a sheep, they give wool, right? Cheese, you can make a cheese out of the milk from the sheep. You can actually sell the sheep for meat. So there's a value that each sheep gives you. And that value is given by the following function, 120 minus Q1 plus Q2. So notice, even though I am herder 1, the value that I get depends on not only Q1, but also Q2. So can you see how that happens? Matta or modanta amar akarna, right? So because somebody else is also grazing their sheep on the field, it affects me. If the other herder are 100টা sheep নিয়ে আসে, then I won't be able to graze my sheep on the field, right? Because they'll eat all the grass. So the value that I get from my sheep depends not only on my sheep, on the number of my sheep, but also on the number of the other person's sheep, right? So that's why the value function is a function of both Q1 as well as Q2. And in this example, it is given by 120 minus Q1 plus Q2. Has everybody understood this? My value that I get from my sheep depends not only on my sheep, but also on the other person's sheep. Has everybody understood this? Okay. So notice that V falls as QI rises. So ceteris paribus, Q2 যদি বেড়ে যায়, আমার V কমে যাবে. Ceteris paribus যদি Q1 বেড়ে যায়, আমার V কমে যাবে, right? So Q1, and even if Q1 and Q2 both rise, the value of V falls, right? So that is also something that you have to keep in mind. So how do I represent the normal form of this game? I cannot use a matrix. Sometimes you can use a matrix to represent the outcomes of a normal form. Sometimes you can't. This is an instance when you cannot use a normal form or a payoff matrix to show the payoffs of the game. The normal form in this case is simply a listing of the herder's payoff functions, right? So sometimes you can express a game in normal form or in extensive form. Sometimes you can't. It is not always possible. This is an example where you just have to list the payoff functions. Now, the payoff of each player is the quantity of sheep times the value per sheep. So আমার যদি 10টা sheep থাকে এবং এক একটা sheepের value যদি 50 টাকা করে হয়, what's the total value of sheep? I have 10 sheep and the value of each sheep is 50 taka. 500, right? So it's the quantity of sheep multiplied by the value per sheep, okay? So the payoff function of herder one in our book, we denote payoff functions using U. So U1 is the payoff of herder one. সে তার payoff calculate করবে কেমন করে? তার কয়টা sheep আছে? He has Q1 sheep. What is the value per sheep? V. So the total value Q1 multiplied by V. So Q1 multiplied by what was the value of V? 120 minus Q1 minus Q2. Right? So here you have 120 minus Q1 plus Q2. If I remove the bracket, it's a minus Q1 minus Q2 হয়ে যায়. So V times Q1. Okay? So here you have it. Q1 multiplied by V. So if I am herder 2, my total value or my total payoff, I beg your pardon, is Q2 times V. So Q2 times 120 minus Q1 minus Q2. Okay? Now to find the Nash equilibria, you have to solve each herder's value maximization problem. So I have to maximize U. Okay? If I am herder 1, I maximize U1 with respect to Q1. So again, you have to be a little careful. Ekhane, if you are herder 1, you can only control Q1, the number of your sheep. You have no control over the number of sheep of the other herder. So when you are maximizing your own payoff, you do so with respect to Q1. So herder 1 will solve, maximize with respect to Q1 his own payoff function. Q1 times 120 minus Q1 minus Q2. He's going to maximize this with respect to Q1. So how is he going to do it? He's going to calculate del U1 by del Q1. So all of you, তোমাদের হাতে কাগজ কলম আছে?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so all of you are going to do one thing. You're going to multiply, you're going to remove the brackets. তোমরা 120 minus Q1 minus Q2 কে Q1 দিয়ে গুণ করলে, what do you get? এখনই লেখো. Multiply 120 minus Q1 minus Q2 with Q1 and tell me the result. What do you get? 120 Q1 minus
Q
square minus Q1 Q2. Okay, this is your U1. Differentiate U1 with respect to Q1. তখন what is your result? Q1 এর সাপেক্ষে তোমার রেজাল্টটাকে differentiate করো. What do you get? 120 minus
2Q1
minus Q2. Right, you set it equal to 0. Okay? এখান থেকে Q1 টা বের করে আনো. What is Q1? So you have 2Q1 is equal to 120 minus Q2. So Q1 is equal to 60 minus Q2 by 2. So has everybody got this result? Q1 is equal to 60 minus Q2 by 2. Okay, this is the best response function of player 1. Right? The BR1, we call it BR1, the best response function of player 1 as a function of Q2. So Q1 er best response will be a function of Q2. Notice right-hand side there is Q2. Similarly, in an exactly similar fashion, you can figure out Q2. In an exactly similar fashion, you can figure out Q2. So Q2 is going to be 60 minus Q1 by 2. And this is the best response function of player 2, which, as we can see, is a function of Q1. Okay? So you have two best response functions, Q1 and